Hello, Composition 2 students. I am here to talk to you about two schemes for Essay 2, revision of writing from your past, and some tropes. And so for the schemes that I want to talk about for Essay 2, you remember earlier in the semester I did a lecture on what schemes and tropes are. But for the schemes for this module, we're focusing on isyntodon and polysyntodon. And you'll remember that schemes are writing patterns, sentence patterns, word orders. In this case, you're going to notice we're focusing mostly on punctuation, the comma, or the conjunction, which is the word like and, or but, or so, or nor. But in this case, probably and is our best focus. So here are the schemes I want you to practice in Essay 2 when you do your revision. Somewhere in your essay, you're going to have to use both of them, one of each. And both sentence types require a list. So you'll notice from my first silly example that I actually kind of define what asyntodon is. And the thing that we're focusing on, y'all, is the comma. So you'll notice, if I can get my cursor there, you'll notice that, let me move my image over because it's blocking my tool over here. You'll notice that the list of objects or nouns in this particular sentence is separated by commas. And usually in a sentence that has maybe 3 items in the list, you have a comma, the word and then the last item. But you'll notice, I'm not going to keep highlighting them, but you'll notice that the last one does not have the and. So you're just using commas to separate the items in the list. So using asyntodon in a sentence requires that the writer lists information, objects, facts, parts of a definition, details, descriptions, reflections. No and at the end, no and anywhere, just commas. This is a correct sentence. This is rhetorical style, and I want you to practice with this so that you have a different sentence type. And I guess I'll say that in a different way, a different type of sentence in your writing. So you'll notice that I did this on purpose, pretty intentionally. I really sped up my reading of the list. But that's what the effect of asyntodon is, that it causes the reader to read quicker because the commas speed up the pace, speed up this the way that the sentence is read. So you might consider using asyntodon in a sentence where you're listing more than 3, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 different, things in the sentence because it speeds up the reading. So polysyntodon is the opposite. It's going to slow down the sentence, and that's because instead of the commas, we are using and only. So you see I'm highlighting the and so you can see where the list in the sentence is. Then I'll read the sentence. But in this case, you're not using the commas. And I wanted to say that you've probably been in a situation where you've been marked wrong by an English teacher, an English professor for not having an and after the last comma. Or in this case, maybe an English teacher or professor would say, what is this sentence with all these ands? Just use commas. But again, this is rhetorical style, you all. This is not about English grammar accuracy or perfection. We're trying to find a way to use our words to cause an effect in a sentence when we're using a scheme, right? And in this case, we have speeding up a list and slowing down a list. So that's what we're going for, is an effect. So we're not thinking about grammar at this point at all. This is where you may hear people talk about how, writers break the rules that they know. Once they know the rule, they're allowed to bend the rule, break the rule, and that's what's sort of happening with style. And that's why when we see writing in more creative genres like fiction or creative nonfiction essays and that kind of thing, we see that the writers aren't following the grammar rules that we're required to follow in writing English essays for college classes because the writer's going for style instead of grammar accuracy. So let's look at the example polysyntodon with the and. So notice no commas at all. Polysyntodon also requires a list in a sentence, but does the opposite of asyntodon because the list and the pace and the speed and the focus for the reader slows down. So I made my list of things slow down because of the and. So those are the two schemes you're going to practice in Essay 2. I'll be looking for them. Again, going to tell you asyntonon would work better with a longer list. Polysyntonon wouldn't necessarily need a longer list, but you might consider using polysyntonon in a place in your essay where you really want the reader to kind of slow down and you're trying to emphasize something because of a slower pace. So just think about where you place the sentences and not just place them randomly just to meet the requirement, right? You want to use the effect to its effect, or their effect to their effect. So let's talk about some tropes. So tropes are not about sentence patterns. They're more about, you see my definition of them down here, changes or surprising twists in the meaning of words. I have given you the page numbers where you can read about tropes in the textbook, depending on the edition you have. The textbook is going to go over a lot of the ones we've already talked about in earlier lectures, like allusion and metaphor, but some other ones are there: irony, rhetorical questions, metonymy, trying to think of just some other random ones. Hyperbole is there. So, you can look up some of the ones I've just mentioned in the textbook. I'm going to go over a few that aren't in the textbook and just kind of talk to you about them a little bit without examples. Synecdoche is a really good one. It's used a lot in literature. It means that you, as a writer, will refer to a part of something instead of the whole of something. So here's an example that you might refer to me as the two eyes who read your essay, when really I'm a whole person, right? I'm a whole person reading your essay, but you're thinking about the eyes looking at your essay. So the synecdoche there is the part of me, the small part of me, my eyes, being referenced instead of me, the whole teacher. Zoigma is the use of a verb in a sentence in two different ways so that it has a different meaning each time the verb is referenced. So I read a sentence that had zoigma in it the other day about the queen taking tea, but also taking meetings in her chamber where she has meetings, right? So the verb take, meaning to take tea, and then to take meetings. So it's a really interesting trope because you're using one verb in the sentence and then it ends up having two different meanings by the end of the sentence. So it's a lot of, I think, kind of a fun one to use. Mostly because verbs don't often have a lot of focus in our sentences other than the action that they're creating. And so to create a trope with the verb is kind of a cool thing to do. Puns, I know you've heard of puns. I think they're often used for humor, to lighten the mood of your writing a little bit. I'll give you a silly example. When I went to the doctor last Monday about my allergic reaction on my hands, my doctor was trying to be silly and telling me that he didn't want to make any rash decisions about the medication he put me on, which was a funny joke, right? It's a funny pun to use rash because I in fact had problems with my hands and a rash going down my fingers. So, an example of a pun. I think puns are fun. When I can pull one off when I'm teaching, I feel like I'm pretty clever. So there's kind of this moment as that you'll have as the writer where you're able to use the vocabulary in that section of your essay to make kind of a funny have a funny moment with your reader. So puns are a lot of fun too. Apostrophe. It's not what you're thinking where you would put an apostrophe S at the end of a noun, to show possession of something, like Beth's glass of water that I have right here, right? Beth's with an apostrophe S. No, apostrophe in this case as a trope means that you're referring to someone who is not present. So if I were writing a poem and I were thinking about death, and Emily Dickinson did this quite a lot, actually. She used apostrophe quite often. She would refer to death with a capital D, as if death was a person or a persona that she was talking to. So when you use that trope in your writing to refer to someone who is not there, it might be in reference to someone who's written a source that you're referring to, and it's as if you're having a conversation with that person, even though they're not present and it's through this writing mechanism that you're referring to them. So apostrophe is an interesting trope to use as well. Last, litotes. It's a kind of meiosis. Meiosis is understatement. Hyperbole is overstatement or exaggeration. So understatement is making a point in a subtle, soft, not aggressive way. And litotes does something similar to understatement, where you might make a reference to someone who's really, really good at something and say they're not so good at something, to make the point that they're really, really good. And it's kind of downplaying something. So, making a statement about maybe a scientist not being good at math, to kind of downplay or have an understatement about that, even though they're probably very good at that. So it's something you can use to say something that actually is the opposite, that the truth is actually the opposite of what you're stating. All right, so those are some tropes you can think about, but definitely check out the sections in the textbook too, because there are plenty of examples there. And you have to use at least one trope in Essay 2. That's the requirement. So give it a shot. It can be on a sentence level. If you tried a trope that was something that would take up more space, like an analogy, which is an extended comparison. A metaphor can be a quick comparison that you're making between two things, but an analogy would be more extended, where you're maybe showing the similarities and the differences between the two things. So that would take up a lot more space than just maybe making a quick use of a verb that has two different meanings within one sentence, right? So this might not be a large part of Essay 2, but just like something that you can put in on the sentence level. So think about that, because what I'm asking you to try actually with both the schemes, the two schemes that I'm requiring, and the one trope that I'd like you to try, again, may not take up that much room in your piece, and maybe can just focus on one sentence level. Focus at the sentence level. I know I'm being a little repetitive here, but I'm just trying to stress that you'll do this through revision. You've added 2 pages of content, you've made some other changes with genres, you've changed your purpose and your audience, but revision can happen on this smaller sentence level as well. So go for it. I'm super excited to see how creative you can be with these schemes and these tropes. Talk to you soon.